Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Brutal. I'm Anthony. Today I want to talk to you about a little weird subcategory, sub-beer style known as the Graf Vienna Lager. Now, if you'll notice, this is actually a Dos Equis Amber Especial, and this is a Victoria Cerveza Modelo. These are incredibly well-known beer brands. I mean, they're some of the top-selling Mexican beers on the planet. Yet, they have a history behind them that I don't think most people know. And even more so, I don't think people know that they're actually a relative, a descendant of the Vienna Lager known as the Graf Vienna Lager. So today I want to kind of dive into how and why Mexico is brewing Vienna lagers and why they're so popular and how they came about and how they came to be and why they're a little bit different than what you would expect out of both a Mexican lager and a Vienna lager. So the story of the Graf style Vienna lager originates in Mexico thanks to a Swiss immigrant known as Santiago Graf. The weird thing about that is I don't know if that's his real name. Well, I don't know how popular the name Santiago is in Switzerland, but I tried to do a lot of research to find out if that's his real name. I don't know, but anyways, Mr. Graf was a bit of an enterprising businessman who had moved to Mexico during the time period where the Austro-Hungarian Empire actually kind of controlled Mexico at that point in time. He actually purchased a small Mexican ale brewery. He wanted to bring some of his homeland to his new home, and that included darker beers. It also meant bringing lagering to Mexico. And in doing so, he created what was affectionately called the first commercially successful beer from Mexico. This beer was a darker amber lager, which was a feat in itself because lagering requires extended periods of aging in very cold climates. And if you know anything about Mexico, they're kind of known for like how hot it is down there. Now, at this point in time, there was some attempts at modernization in Central Europe, in Vienna, in Munich, and probably Switzerland as well, where they had started adopting refrigeration. But from all the sources I was able to gather, it didn't seem that he actually had that ability. So he likely was doing some like underground cellaring and fermentation that would keep it away from the heat. Regardless, he was somehow successful in actually producing lagers. And that was rather unusual for the period for the reasons I mentioned, but also because he had a stickler. He kind of carried on the traditions of Vienna lager brewing from Anton Dreher, the creator, the inventor of the Vienna lager, through his fixation, his intense desire to only brew beers utilizing the best ingredients available. He was a stickler for high quality ingredients, which he would then turn alchemy-like into high quality beers. Mr. Graf refused to use locally grown barley. He refused to use 6-row barley that was incredibly popular in North America. And he even refused the higher quality 6-row barley that was coming out of Canada that a large majority of North American and Mexican brewers were utilizing at that time. Instead, he personally shipped in malt from his homeland back in Europe. And when you think about how complex of a logistical situation that was back in the 1800s, that's pretty insane. You know, he had to put in the order, send it off, and then have them slowly shipped over before he would be able to actually utilize them in his brewery. But that really goes to show how dedicated he was to producing high quality beer. Only the finest ingredients for Mr. Graf. Now, during his formulation process, during his attempts to recreate the Vienna lager, which he so loved, he ended up having to go darker and a touch sweeter than what would be expected if you were actually drinking that beer style in Vienna at that time. And nobody really knows why, but the leading theory is that maybe his fermentation process wasn't as precise and as perfect as he wanted it to be, so he ended up using darker and sweeter malts to be able to cover up some of the imperfections that occurred during the brutal Mexican summer fermentation cycle that was imposed on his beloved lagers. Another theory that I've heard is that most of Mexico's water, both then and now to a large degree, come from large underground aquifers, which contains huge amounts of mineral deposits, which wouldn't play well with a traditional, paler, hoppier beer like the Austrian Vienna lager. So to be able to counteract this, you have to utilize a little bit of a darker malt, which alters the pH in your mash, allowing minerals to interact and play well with your beer. Now, he had been brewing his specialty beer, and it had caught on pretty well with the local population in Toluca, Mexico. But eventually, an international railroad was brought to his hometown. And the first thing that he did was bring in German industrial refrigerators in order to further enhance his brewing operations. And it was this industrialization of his brewery, this new mechanical advancement, that allowed him to really perfect his recipe. However, he kept it going a bit darker, and he kept the style and the color that he became well known for, and it ended up being kind of defined by those malts, by that extra sweetness, which allowed him to cement it into the beer annuals as its own unique beer style. The Graf style Vienna lager. The Graf style Vienna lager is very much akin to its forefather, its ancestor, the Anton Dreher style Vienna lager, in the sense that it is a very mellow drinking beer with a slightly rounder and sweeter body than you would get out of your other Central European pale lagers of the time, like the Pilsner or the Helles lager. However, the Graf style Vienna lager does accentuate those factors just a little bit more. It is a little bit more mellow. It is a little bit sweeter. On top of that, there is the additional darkness. There's also a hint of roasted malts in there that does largely stray from the original interpretation. Regardless, you still wind up with a very mellow, smooth, and a touch sweet, easy drinking lager. It's everything you want, just kind of repackaged, reinterpreted. But the important part was it was still approachable, recognizable by the mass Germanic immigration movement that happened in Mexico. All the newcomers to Mexico were instantly able to pick this up, drink it, think it felt familiar, think it reminded them of their homelands, and it furthered its popularity across Mexico. In fact, many of the Graf style Vienna lagers that exist to this day, especially the larger brands, often pay homage or showcase where its origin came from, oftentimes citing, yes, it is brewed in the Vienna style. And in the case of the Victoria, there is even an image of King Gambrinus, the Central European king of beer, famous throughout all the Germanic lands and Belgium and Netherlands, and it really, really drives home the fact that this style, this reinterpretation did come from old world brewing practices. The Graf style Vienna lager was actually so popular that the locals, they actually ended up shunning away the mass influx of import beers that were coming from Canada and America to Mexico. In Andreas Krinmar's book Vienna Lager, it even covers how the Graf style Vienna lager completely pushed out competitive brewing powerhouses like Anheuser-Busch out of the local market. Mr. Graf was so successful, it ended up becoming a little bit of a curse. He constantly struggled to be able to get out enough beer to satiate the thirst of the local drinking population, and was constantly struggling to be able to fill orders to local bars, breweries, restaurants, anywhere people wanted to drink. They wanted to drink his beer. He had to figure out a way to be able to produce more. So he started seeking out a lot of investors, which allowed him to open up a massive state-of-the-art brewing industrial complex that was solely focused around producing his Graf Vienna style lager. He furthered the process by creating his own malting facility. That way he could be able to produce specially fine-tuned malts specifically designed to be able to recreate and produce his specialty beer style on a mass scale. He would never compromise on quality for quantity. So it really earned him some goodwill amongst the local drinking population, because he never cut corners. Unfortunately for Mr. Graf, anything that is successful or popular is going to be replicated. And because there was just absolutely no way he could completely squeeze out the market, other competitors started trying to recreate his process as well, bringing in their own refrigeration, utilizing their own specialty malts to be able to produce something similar, akin to it, thus really kind of solidifying it as a beer style instead of just a specific one brand offering, And in a weird twist, because people were recreating this so much, the Graf style Vienna lager, about a century later after its initial invention, had actually become so popular that it was more popular. It was being produced more and sold more than the actual original Anton Dreher style original Vienna lager. This new one in the new world was way more popular than the OG. The Graf style Vienna lager remained insanely popular for nearly a century. It was the #1 selling beer in Mexico, as well as being the #1 beer that was exported out of Mexico into the remainder of the North American market. Things would kind of pick up pace and change a little bit for the Graf style Vienna lager when the major brewing conglomerate Modelo actually purchased Graf's original brewery and kind of incorporated his original recipe, resulting in a rebranding of the Victoria lager. And through Victoria, the Modelo Group has continued to push the Graf style Vienna lager into the modern era, along with other brands such as their Modelo Negra, which was originally classified as a Vienna lager but has since been rebranded to a Munich Dunkel, and I'm not sure why. But other brands followed suit, such as the Bohemia Vienna. Not to mention, in the modern era, there is an abundance of craft breweries both in Mexico and in America, which are continuing to produce the style, keeping the Graf style Vienna lager alive. Mr. Graf's original vision had gone on to become one of the solidifying pillars of the overarching umbrella term of the Mexican lager. I mean, he definitely made his place in history. Unfortunately, the Graf style Vienna lager has had a bit of a fall from grace, and that's because as these major brewing conglomerates bought up and started pushing out their own style of the Graf Vienna lager in order to be competitive and remain dominant in the market, we saw a sharp decrease in quality. And that's because these breweries were trying to make money, try to stay competitive. They started using subpar ingredients. A lot of adjuncts, corn and things like that were cut into it, where Mr. Graf strongly adhered to quality overall. To make matters worse, the darker kiln specialty malts, the crystal malts, are largely excluded as well, in favor for color corrective ingredients and chemicals and things like that that provide that slightly roastier touch that you do detect in it. But all around, we're just seeing a massive decline in quality. And over time, the entire history of it was just kind of forgotten. The original connection to the Vienna lager, to Mr. Graf, was just kind of severed away as they just kind of became a little bit nameless, just kind of big beer brands that were just have dark synonyms and dark terms on there to differentiate it from their paler adjunct Mexican lager brethrens underneath the same beer brand umbrella. In the modern market, the new versions, the new interpretations of the Graf's Vienna lager, they're still pretty popular. You can walk into any Walmart and be able to find these. I mean, I know from experience, that's literally where I bought these. So they do continue to exist, but they, and even though I've never had the original Graf style Vienna lager other than drinking a few Victorias in my day, it does feel hollow once you learn the history behind it, because it just seems like so much of it was stripped away, so much of it lost to time and capitalism. But, I mean, maybe there's a chance that we could see a rebirth of it through the modern day craft brewing revolution, There has been a massive push for lagers, mostly in the pale category, but I have seen a ton of breweries start dipping their toes into Mexican lagers, putting on a craftier, high quality version of your Modelos, your Coronas, things like that. It's just so interesting that something so obscure, something so mysterious is so popular. Anyways, remember, there's a story in every bottle and that life is beautiful. Cheers.